Yeah, the option basically, it's kind of like if you're negotiating with like the mob, it's right. You don't have to buy a house in Nusantara. You can stay with the airport where it is. You can keep your house where it is. It will go underwater at some point, so it's totally up to you what you do. All options are on the table. Your call.
It's your choice.
See you in Nusantara.
We'll just be over there. If you want to come over, come over.
Come over, fine. If you want to have a swim, stay where you are. Early options. Welcome back to the Offsite podcast. Today we are all three of us joined together, Carlos, Mike, and myself, in a very warm in-person for the first time in a long time in London. Folks, how are we going?
It's odd to be in real life.
Yeah. I'm very, very aware of the camera and microphone now.
It's good though. I think after the walk, the sweat's starting to cool down in the air conditioning, so I'm feeling good.
Yeah. For those not in the UK, it is warm in a place that doesn't have air conditioners in almost all the real rooms and buildings. So, Carlos, what's going on? What have you been reading these?
So, the palm in Dubai, there's the big functional palm in Jumeirah.
There's two of them, right? Isn't there?
Yeah, so the second one, they mothballed, basically. Yep.
When you say mothball, they built a large part of it.
They built a huge amount of it, but they stopped. It started back in 2008. It's called Jumeirah 2 Palm, which is just a marketing exercise for property value. It's in Jebel Ali, which is a bit further along. But yeah, they're restarting now. They've restarted is it dredging when they spray the sand to create the land? But yeah, it will create 110 kilometers of premium beach property and hotels and 60 hotels. So yeah, huge amount.
This sounds a little bit like you're telling us to buy property in. Is that premium beachfront?
Yeah.
Okay, that's premium beachfront.
Only
property.
upside.
Okay, cool. Can't go wrong.
A little off-market special.
Yeah. If you're looking to move money from countries to other countries.
After the last 2 weeks where Mike and I have traveled from Australia to Vietnam and then to the UK. One thing we've learned along the way, if there's any country where you want to buy off the plan property, it's Dubai and Da Nang in Vietnam, where basically half the high rises are partially complete and stopped part of the way. So off the plan purchases are a good idea.
Solid.
No risk.
What can go wrong?
100% happening.
Mike, and welcome back, mate, after a couple of weeks off and a few other substitutes in.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's good to be back. Usually I only get the call up when one of you is having a baby. So it's nice to be
There's at least a few weeks till that happens again. So
I'm back.
Awesome. So we got some interesting topics on the docket today. So for our first in-person episode in a long time, we're going to start in Indonesia. We're going to talk about the country's decision to move its entire capital city from Jakarta to Nusantara, which just blew my mind. An entire city being built in the jungle, or I guess what was the jungle, but we won't mention that. Next, we're discussing a proposed replacement to planning in P6, controversial topic, in a tool called Planera that brings a collaborative and sort of whiteboard aspect to CPM planning. And then finally, we're going to end on a bit of good news as opposed to the other two topics with the completion of the coolest project ever, the Viking wind farm located in the Shetlands that's set to power 500,000 homes in the UK. Not negging any of our other topics, but all three of these are pretty good. So to kick things off, construction in Nusantara. Construction's well underway in Indonesia on a brand new city by the name of Nusantara that aims to replace Jakarta as the country's capital. The new city is hoping to accelerate the Indonesian economy by relieving the burden on Jakarta as the capital and business center. Additionally, this should also relieve the burden on a city that's losing 25 centimeters a year to the ocean. Which is a battle you don't want to take on. So we're going to dive into this somewhat ambitious nature of a scheme and how feasible it is. So what do you reckon? Moving the capital city? Bold strategy, Cotton?
Has it been done before? Are there any other major capital city relocations you can think of?
I've moved house before, but I can't think of
that was major.
I think the overwhelming need to move the city because it's being subsumed by the ocean is, I didn't know that. Was that something you're aware of?
I was not aware, no. Yeah, it's a bit wild because they're not just moving the city; they're moving it to an entirely different major island.
Yeah.
So Borneo, which is where like Brunei is.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like northeast of the island that Jakarta's on.
If it was a battle, it's the equivalent of running away from the ocean. The ocean's winning. We're going to run away from the ocean and go somewhere else.
And into the hills. Yeah. The strategy checks out.
Yeah. There was a couple of parts that seem a bit dodgy. So there's the social impact, because this seems like a rich person scheme, because it's going to be like a high-end, carbon neutral, flashy project.
Yep.
And you'd imagine that the average person in Jakarta doesn't have the cash to make the transition. So what will happen to those that are left in property price, in infrastructure, in everything?
Yep.
So that seems a bit dodgy. And then if you tie that with the political risk of, like, let's just say the current party is slightly right wing and slightly left wing come in, they go, well, let's sack that off and build hospitals and schools.
Yeah, right.
So yeah,
I think the question of like what happens to people's homes if the capital moves was probably the key question that anyone in Jakarta is probably asking,
because it feels like there's, on one hand, it feels like you're moving the capital city, but that feels like a very different thing to moving the people that live in the current capital city to a new capital city.
Yeah.
So I don't know if is it a build it and they will come kind of thing?
The plan of attack is not to force people to move immediately. The relocation is going to involve moving 38 ministries and the officials from those ministries over to Nusantara by 2024 and then phasing into 2027. So this is happening now. And then for everyone else that's going to live in Jakarta, they will get, don't worry, there's plenty of financial support for the move over and buying a house in the new city. The government has allocated a whopping $5.6 million US
each. I was going to say, that seems reasonable.
So Indonesia's like top 10 countries population, right? It's like 200 or 300 million.
Yeah, I think there's 10 million.
I'm going to bet there's at least 20 million people in and around Jakarta.
Yeah, I think there's like 10 mil plus in Jakarta.
This holds 1.5 million once fully developed in 2045. So there's going to be this huge lag.
The math doesn't necessarily check
out. It does. The math doesn't math.
The other bit of math that doesn't check out is, so it houses 1.5 million people, costs $32 billion, which is only 20 grand per person.
That seems cheap.
That's good value.
But other countries should build their cities in Indonesia and then ship them. So offsite fabrication. You should
That's
build
a big barge.
Sublet out.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. That's way cheaper. That's what we need, more offsite fabrication.
Yeah.
Yeah, the total support package it sounds better if you say it's 90 billion rupee, but which translates to or converts to 5.6 million US dollars. And residents can choose to receive compensation or be relocated through a social impact handling scheme, which sounds like a nice set of words for forcing people.
So that mean that if you were saying that there's 2 mil max population, 5.6 million, everyone gets $3, $2.50. That's not even a tube ride.
So does anyone know when if they're relocating now, they must have been building this project for a while.
I think they
must be temporary accommodation
last year, maybe.
That's unreasonably quick.
Yeah, I think that first phase, which I said is the most ambitious phase, was supposed to only take 2 years, which seems very fast.
Has anyone done a comparison between this and Neom?
No, they're quite hard to compare.
on so many
the
levels.
only thing they have in the similarity is the environmental impact and the indigenous rights. They're quite similar.
But so did anyone look at the contractors building all this if it's been going for like a year or 2 years?
I was thinking about that a second ago, but there's no internet in here.
We'll put that one in post.
No, all I saw was 2024, I think, is when they're intending to start moving people over, but they are already well behind schedule because, lo and behold, there's been weather and supply chain issues, which couldn't have been foreseen given you're building in the tropics.
The idea of trying to relocate 2 million people is...
It's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling.
I'm going to bet that at least half the 1.5 million people they'll be selling on the real estate market.
Say that again?
I'd imagine the 1.5 million people that will live there, you're going to
so
have
there's
like a decent
there's
chunk
1.5 people, 1.5
total.
million living there, but they said they're relocating 2 million. So are they going to lose them? That math doesn't math either.
Yeah.
No, I think what they're basically doing is we'll move all the government areas, relocate all of the people that are working for the government,
Get a base.
then the rest might happen at some stage in the future.
Yeah.
I also don't know what's going to happen with airlines though, because I was having a look. Garuda is the main carrier, and they obviously fly out of Jakarta. There's a fairly large amount of infrastructure to change or build like another major airport, which I couldn't see on any of the capital city stuff.
Yeah, the option basically it's kind of like if you're negotiating with like the mob, it's right. You don't have to buy a house in Nusantara. You can stay with the airport where it is. You can keep your house where it is. It will go underwater at some point, so it's totally up to you what you do. All options are on the table. Your call.
It's your choice.
See you in Nusantara.
We'll just be over there. If you want to come over, come over.
Come over, fine. If you want to have a swim, stay where you are. Are the options. Is it being subsumed because of land subsidence or global warming?
I know there's a bunch of rivers that are running. So I think there's like 10 plus rivers that are running through. And so I think there's a lot of overflow every time it rains. So global warming and sea level rising. So ocean plus river, a lot of ways that water's getting in there. Basically.
Yeah, right. That's shocking then. That ended on a pessimistic note.
There's one positive takeaway.
Yeah, bring it back. Yeah. Come on.
They aim to be carbon neutral as a country by 2060, and this is part of that.
Cool.
That's the positive.
That is a good silver lining.
Well done. We're back.
Excellent.
Jumping on to the next topic. So there's a startup that has recently raised 13 odd million US dollars to specifically tackle the construction planning space. So something that we know a little bit about. And it's basically targeting a one-on-one competition with Oracle's P6. With a different take on CPM planning. So Planera aims to take a sort of collaborative whiteboard first network diagram type approach to allow teams to build their plans and to build this all-in-one platform of replacing the master schedule and some sort of short-range working schedule type environment, and then a whole bunch of these other kind of master schedule specific tools like quality checks, schedule quality checks and stuff on top of it. So this platform has the product exists today. They'd raised some money in the last 2 odd years, and they've just closed a round of 13 million for what seems like the classic battle of everyone thinks something needs to happen with P6 and no one knows what's going to happen with P6, and everyone thinks that it's a kind of eat the elephant type of scenario. Carlos, did you have a look at this and what did you think?
It looks great for delivering small private projects. I get it. The ability to pull a team and collaboratively build a plan with maybe the experience in the room.
Yeah, so I guess maybe to add some context to for those that haven't heard of it. So if you imagine in Microsoft Project, you have these different views of a schedule. You have this sort of Gantt chart style view where you can have a kind of table and then this Gantt view. And then you can sometimes people in Project will switch to a different view, which is kind of like a network diagram style view. Planera's new approach is starting with the network diagram. So having this kind of open whiteboard space where people can build their plans from the network diagram, and that kind of generates the Gantt chart in the back end, and that's kind of like a secondary view. So the authoring of a plan in their view should happen from this kind of network diagram type interface, and that's kind of the future of CPM scheduling.
I try and think of it in the concept of how much information do we actually need to digest and put onto a page. Mm-hmm. Going through what looks like a sort of flow diagram from first principles. The diagram itself is going to be an absolute beast on anything that's of a reasonable size. Mm-hmm. I can imagine getting lost in it because it's not this linear sequence and set of milestones that we're kind of used to. And that's probably a familiarity thing, not necessarily can it be done? Yeah, I think the leap is I just can't see clients accepting that as a contract schedule.
Well, I think one of the outputs is going to be a P6 style output that you could export from it, an XCR or an XML in that format. They look like they've replicated a lot of the scheduling engine of P6. I have not used it or tested it, but from the demos and stuff that I've seen, it looks like it has or is trying to replace a lot of the scheduling engine of P6. The thing that was interesting, I kind of take your point about like how would it work on a larger project. All the demos look like, it's a small network diagram and it's kind of, it looks nice and neat and an interesting way to sort of view a schedule. But one of the concepts when you get to 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 activities in a schedule is a little bit around this idea of information density, like how much information can you actually fit into the viewport when I'm discussing with you, and how much do we need to have in the viewport in order to have a meaningful discussion about the plan. So I like this idea of you've got this infinite canvas and you can zoom out and go into this section and go over to another section. There's definitely something in this better way of navigating a schedule. It's something that we've looked at a bunch of times and is really interesting to think about. The trade-off, however, with this ability to kind of zoom in and out in this canvas, kind of like a Miro whiteboard type experience, is in order to get enough content on the page that you can actually read the name of the task or whatever it is, you have to zoom into quite a narrow field of view for only a handful of tasks. And when you're doing a master schedule, there comes this interesting question of like, how much information do you need to be able to hold in your viewport in order to understand the context of the things that you're interacting with? Like in P6, you can cram an incredible amount of stuff in the viewport by jamming stuff down. The row heights are really small. You can collapse and expand. I agree, and I see the point around like, how would it work? How does that kind of interface work on a larger?
Yeah, particularly because you're dealing with, I guess, all of the difference between font size, the shape that sits around that font, the lines separating those boxes. Like when I had a quick look at the demo, there's a lot of white space that sits in those visual network diagrams that challenges the density kind of bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was also wondering, what are your guys' views in terms of, like, obviously everyone loves to gripe about kind of P6 and the interface and those kind of things. Do planners like to gripe about it but ultimately still want to use it, or is there an appetite to actually change the way that they plan in some kind of structurally different way?
You've touched on the like favorite beer topic for any planner of like, what are we going to do about P6? Yeah. P6 is ingrained on large projects. It's ingrained at a couple of different levels that would make it incredibly hard to displace at all, in that it's like contractually ingrained. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it's like written specifically into contracts, because there's like a knowledge about how the scheduling engine works, for example, and you don't get funny outcomes, or at least the funny outcomes you do get from the scheduling engine, everyone knows about they're predictable funny outcomes. There's also like a culturally ingrained position where if you think about a master schedule, most people immediately just think of it. So it's like, it's a known brand, and it's just, even if you were to give something that's 10 times better, that brand strength is just so strong. And then it's also like technically ingrained in that there's a entire ecosystem of planners, schedules, consultants, support, training, accreditation.
Yeah, there's a whole ecosystem.
There's a whole ecosystem built around that product that is fighting against any change, good or bad. And this is not like something totally new. This is something that exists in other industries, like trying to displace like a Salesforce, which people know is like a fairly clunky experience for anyone that's used that as like a CRM. I guess folks listening to this in construction might not have used a CRM, but like this is a well-established, there's a lot of parallels between like a Salesforce and a P6. It's market standard, adopted by most of the biggest contractors or biggest companies. Isn't the greatest user experience, but there's an entire ecosystem built around it. And I think to displace anything like that, you can't displace it with like a slightly better mousetrap. You need an entirely new paradigm shift. I actually like a lot of the ideas that the Planera product is playing with. The test for them will be, is what they're doing a big enough paradigm shift to build the momentum?
Minimal improvement isn't going to change an industry.
Exactly.
The thing that, as soon as I saw the sketchy video on the product, the thing that I immediately thought is, by visualizing it like a workflow or the diagram, could you build optionality into schedules based on assumptions? So you've already got like a plan B built into the plan.
You're going to have to, asking for a mate, you're going to have to maybe explain that again.
So we usually have a schedule and then a list of assumptions that we use to build the schedule. But imagine if I oversimplify it, like question, yes, no, this is the path. When you have a workflow diagram, you can have multiple paths which may or may not be used based on certain criteria or assumptions being hit. You could predefine alternate routes if assumptions are or aren't true.
But isn't that what logic is doing anyway?
It does, but I think most people, they state their assumption, and that assumption either will or won't have cost and time associated with it. We don't have the options of assumption true or false. This is the output or the outcome. So I feel like that diagram approach would allow you to have like alternate paths that can be predefined, which could be a really useful way to actually manage contract schedules.
As a product tip for Planera.
You're welcome.
I'm pretty sure that's not a feature. But yeah, I think you definitely, when you look at the product and their website and everything, you have to realize that they're very early, and you have to look through the explain a video and stuff and look at the idea. And I think there's some super interesting ideas. If I was a betting man, I'd say that the idea of just an interface change isn't enough of a paradigm shift.
Well, that was what I was trying to think through when I looked at it. What's the big differentiator that they're trying to actually drive? Like, is this going to serve to better improve the speed of planning, or is it going to improve the accuracy of planning, or is it just going to improve the general enjoyment of the planning experience? Like, do you guys have a view on which bit it's trying to tackle and how much better that is or could be than the current kind of paradigm?
Yeah, there's definitely a piece of it that looks like the collaborative, cloud-based, multiple people looking and interacting with it. They've also gone down the path of kind of the all-in-one schedule thing. So you've got your master schedule and these they call working schedules, which in different regions have different names in the one product. And that's a path trodden by many other products around the world. And that's tricky because I just don't, that's something that lots of other people have tried. So maybe that's a right assumption or a wrong assumption for them to, as a product strategy, but that isn't new. So if you put that aside, the other innovation that they've got seems to be around collaboratively building the schedule and letting multiple people through this kind of new approach to building the network in a way that other people can look at and understand, and you can kind of click in and dive deeper. And that is new and interesting. And I think that there's some benefit being pitched around collaboration and getting a better schedule because more people are able to contribute to it.
Yeah, I think if you put your feet in the shoes of the planner, are you going to do a mammoth exercise for a marginal gain? No. If it's not a marginal gain, then the new way of working is actually putting more responsibility onto the team for this collaborative, almost first principles type exercise, which output are great, but again, time poor individuals, and you're trying to convince them into this new way of working, which is sort of at this stage unproven, untested, and not a requirement from a customer. It's a bit of a leap.
Yeah, the other way to look at it is it's almost the opposite to the sort of flag planted in the ground from Alice, for example, which are taking this alternative approach of build a set of rules that are baked into the schedule and have that generate the schedule. This is almost going the other way and saying everyone should be contributing to everything first principles.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting kind of totally opposite approach.
Yeah, I imagine it definitely forces that first principles thinking more. I've obviously not worked in P6, but I imagine the desire to maybe copy and paste some repeating components and set of things would be relatively high in that view. And it doesn't seem super appealing to do that in a whiteboard network diagram.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you could almost see a world where that interface innovation could be I'm not proposing that anyone does this, copied, and Alice could generate a schedule and then let you refine it or review it in a similar style interface. So if I was the product team at Alice, I'd be thinking carefully about
free productives going around.
Free productives going around everywhere. But if I was Alice, I'd be thinking really carefully about whether or not that, because we've talked a lot about this kind of like a canvas style interface and whether the trade-offs of it. And there's some interesting ideas, the ability to dive deeper and deeper into these infinite whiteboards almost. And as a way to have a schedule, one of the problems with a schedule being automatically generated is it's really hard. It's like me doing some work and you have to understand that work. So it's hard to understand what's being generated from that output. Does this interface give a better way for teams to understand what something like an Alice is generating? And should this be like an interface that Alice is thinking about building? Anyway, product tips all around. Anything else on that before we jump off? No, I good luck to the team at Planera. I really like some of the ideas and the innovation there. Cool. Final topic on the docket is in a bit of good. I keep saying this in a bit of good news. We've producer Olu. In a bit of good news, we're exploring the Viking wind farm. So now it's the UK's most productive onshore wind farm. That's the very specific description. The UK's most productive onshore wind farm. That's like the best tennis centre east of this town in this place.
It reminds me of the real estate agents in Australia. So they would say, we have the suburb record for a 4-bedroom house on this street that's been recently renovated with a pool in the backyard.
Carve your niche and you become the best.
That's it. The wind farm has 103 Vestas manufactured turbines and 443 megawatts of installed capacity. Viking, I love that name, will generate enough renewable energy to power nearly 500,000 homes annually, including the population of the Shetland Islands. With the connection coming online a couple of days ago from when we're recording this, do we think this is a big step in the right direction for UK power?
With the name, it has to be, right?
I think that's, yeah. Does anyone know the significance of the Viking wind farm, or was it just pick a cool name?
Vikings would have landed in Scotland, so they would have, it would have been a connection there.
Some history, yeah.
Yeah, really cool project. I think, so there was some big contractors involved. BAM were doing a lot of the heavy civils. I think Balfour were doing the substations, and then like Siemens, McLeod, and obviously Vestas involved. For anyone who's not from the UK, the Shetlands are islands that are like north of the top of Scotland. Mm-hmm. They're like in the windiest place you can imagine in the North Sea. So it's like the perfect spot for producing wind and energy.
Wind, energy, ponies.
Yeah, Shetland ponies, yeah.
So cultured.
The challenge would have been laying the sea cable to bring it back. But yeah, it's quite a big project. It looked pretty successful, which is nice to see. No sort of major delays. But the stat that I thought was quite crazy was there's only 100 turbines and it does 5,000 homes.
500,000.
Sorry, 500,000 homes, which is 5,000 homes per wind turbine.
Yeah, these turbines are massive.
Yeah.
There are like 130, 140 meters tall. Massive turbines. The other thing that stood out to me, I don't know if you've been following a lot of wind projects around the world, of how much work Vestas is doing around the world.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the power of like being the best at like a very specific thing and like being in the right market at the right time. The other day we were talking, it wasn't on the podcast, we were talking offline about this. I think it's a company from the Netherlands, which is the global producer of these machines that do this highly specialized lithography, which is basically a process to create microchips, like super specialized microchips. They're the only people in the world that can make these machines. They're the size of a small bus. They get purchased by companies like TSMC to make microchips. They buy to buy a single one's like $30 million. And they're basically the thing that's producing the thing that NVIDIA is designing, right? This company is, we looked it up the other day. Someone will look it up in a sec, the total value of the company, but this thing is like the world specialized best producer of this very specific thing that the world needs. And Vestas is kind of like in a similar boat. It's super interesting.
I was next to one of the Vestas factories at the weekend where they produce the blades.
Yep.
And the size of the barge just to carry each individual blade that they then assemble into the turbine, it's absolutely massive. Logistically, they're obviously quite difficult to build in these regions, but the return is quite good considering they're relatively inexpensive. 5,000 home per turbine.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It makes the like carbon challenge seem a bit easier.
Yeah.
With those numbers.
Yeah, on what you were talking about, Jace, I just finished that How Big Things Get Done, and they were talking about, so Vestas is based out of Denmark, the Danes, and in particular around that headquarters. I have a feeling it was in about 150 kilometer radius, like 90% or some crazy number of the biggest wind producers are based out of there. And it was because 10, 20 years ago, I can't remember exactly, the producers of energy over there, Danish government subsidized it and said, if you want to create a coal-powered plant, you've got to also build a wind farm. And so they botched a whole bunch, learned a whole bunch, but over that period of time kind of refined this approach of how they build them, highly componentized, obviously. And so the ability to build them offshore and onshore kind of became this core competency of a bunch of Danish companies. And so, yeah, we've seen Vestas across a bunch of the projects.
Yeah, the idea of making these strategic bets as a country in a market and building this ecosystem around it. I remember when I was doing my master's at business school, they were always talked about the example of like Switzerland and watchmaking, because it's not only the companies that make the watch, but all the suppliers to those that all co-located, that makes this super tight-knit community of these this core competency. And it's something that like China's been doing with a couple of markets, like battery production and solar panel production. You know, whenever I think about that, I think about like countries like Australia and the UK. What are the core companies that we should be investing in and trying to cultivate, other than obviously extracting minerals out of the ground?
Yeah, it's hard to think for the UK, apart from Colin the Caterpillar.
Well, God.
Well, after having eaten a whole bunch of Colin the Caterpillars today, that is a core competency. And
it's done very well.
Walking around Monday afternoon, you guys are pretty good at getting to the pub on any day of the week.
Yeah, pubs are a core competency.
Yeah, the offices are empty, but the pubs are full. I think they just come in from home.
Yeah, work from home, that's another core competency.
You can export some of that stuff eventually.
That's I think a really cool project. I think the trend of wind energy production, and obviously the overall global mega trend of energy production generally and green energy production, I think I'll just see more and more of the best. Does anyone see any like main competitors to Vestas on projects that we've worked with or talked to?
Not for the turbines, I don't
think. I don't know enough to make a fully educated response, but most of the large ones seems to be Vestas.
Yeah.
They're definitely the global leader.
Awesome. No, they were some super cool topics. And
sorry, the really interesting part about our project.
Oh, okay. Apart from the name.
All labour, material, transportation was done via helicopter.
All right.
So it's helicopters running all day, every day, because it turned a 3-hour very rough drive into a 10-minute flight. So the whole project was delivered via helicopters.
So like rebar for footings and everything?
Everything, yeah. Really cool.
What do you reckon the weight capacity on a helicopter is to deliver?
It could be those big Chinooks, like the military, the double propeller military ones?
Yeah.
There's a lot
of petrol, yeah. That green energy.
They're building a wind turbine.
4 stars, like dropping to like a 3-star green energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah, it's really cool. Even welfare facilities were dropped in via helicopter, so... Like this jet, it looks like Mordor, I guess, is the most similar compare. It's very rough.
I feel like that's the equivalent of how everyone imagines construction might happen on like the moon or Mars, is like hovercraft going in. Yeah, right.
That does make it live up to the name of the Viking wind farm.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because they had helicopters, didn't they?
Yeah. That was a reference. You got it.
Sorry, mate.
Cool. Carlos, do you want to read us out?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning into today's show. If you did enjoy today's episode, please do like the video or follow us on your chosen podcast platform. We appreciate your support, and we'll catch you all next week.
Lovely to see you all together.
Thank you, gents.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for joining. Cheers, Jace.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, gents. Bye.